Scott Pendlebury from the Collingwood Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
This is Patrick Crouch from the Carlton Footy Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Max Gorn, Melbourne Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Number 31 in my 50 most relevant players for Supercoach, AFL Fantasy and Dream Team for 2025. Sam Walsh. He's been a star of the fantasy footy community for such a long period of time. But right throughout that, not only has it been littered with premium scoring, but it's been littered with frustrating injuries. And coaches are looking at him for 2025 going, will I get more of the same? Or is this finally the year we see Sammy Walsh get back to the best? And if he can do that for a whole year, well, not only have you got a great starting squad option, friend, you might be heading towards the best Supercoach and AFL fantasy midfielder in the entirety of the game. We're talking Sam Walsh on this episode of the 50 Most Relevant. And it's been a little while since we've been able to introduce you to someone new from the football landscape on the Coaches Panel. But we're doing it on this episode today. Chances are, though, he's not new to you if one of these two criteria sits strong. Number one, you consume YouTube, TikTok content around the AFL draft. Chances are, if that's the case, you saw him bullishly advocating for a lot of people, players, trades, and was spot on with a lot of his analysis throughout the AFL draft period. And the other one is if you're a Carlton fan, regularly can you find him in the spaces of social media and digital content speaking about his beloved Blues. So when we had Sam Walsh on, there was only one person that I wanted to come to and have a conversation about from the YouTube and TikTok and Twitter channel, Pommyinoz, is the man himself. Hello, mate. Talking about Sam Walsh today.
Hey, I'm looking forward to this. I mean, yeah, it's Sam Walsh I'll probably talk about Sam Walsh equal to my kids, really, to random people. So I'm looking forward to this, getting into it.
He's going to be such a great player to discuss. Look, midfield eligible, gave us a pretty decent season in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team last year. Seasonal average of a 106.1, meaning in those two formats, you are forking out $1 million plus to be able to get your hands on him. While in Supercoach, a 108.4 seasonal average means he is just shy of that 600,000 marker. Again, the price points and the salary cap available is different in all those platforms, but $583,900 is what you're setting yourself back for. 19 games last year and a Supercoach season high score of 166. That was against my Crows. Well, that's nothing compared to what he's done before. 193 just a few years ago back in 2021 against the Pies. Yeah. He's knocking on the door of the rarefied air of 200 club. While from an AFL Fantasy and Dream Team perspective, that same game against the Crows, he had his season high score for Supercoach. It's the same in AFL Fantasy, 145. You just got to add 10 points per game to get to his career high, though. Again, same game. He absolutely dominated the Pies in 2021. He gave us a 155 in AFL Fantasy. Pommy, something we've been doing on this series of the 50 Most Relevant this time round is starting the episode, not just looking at the data points, the scoring, the trends, the injuries. These are important factors we need to get to. But as someone that has tracked clearly from a long way out, Sam Walsh is a player, the archetype that he is, and structurally how valuable he is to Carlton. Talk us through the type of midfielder he is, because in the fantasy community, we often just look at number, data points, and that's it. We don't truly understand a player's value to a side. How important is Sam Walsh as a midfielder to this side?
I think Sam's like one of them really interesting players that kind of burst out of the blocks, didn't he, when he first came into the scene? He came into a Carlton midfield that, like, I mean, when you've got players like Aaron Mullet and stuff, it's not really that hard to suddenly become the superstar of a football team, let's be honest. But I do think as his career's progressed, he's become such a valuable cog to Carlton that you see that he's probably one of them players that is above average in everything, which when we have injuries means he sacrifices his best football to plug a hole while we desperately get players fit. And I think he's a victim of his own brilliance at times as well. It's fascinating last year, as so many comments about Patrick Cripps and Sam Walsh, and they weren't having good career years, and they both absolutely tore up the Brownlow votes by the end of the season. They are, I'd say he's the workhorse. He's an understated workhorse with a touch of class. He defends incredibly well. He's got that offense, but I do think the last 2 years we've really seen Sam's defense become a real key cornerstone, one of the top tacklers in the competition last year, and willing to get his hands dirty, which I think is a rare trait for someone with his skill set as well. I think people think he's going to be all the glamour, but he's willing to get his hands dirty, which, as a Carlton fan, it's great to see. You want to see everyone knuckle in and defend. So hopefully, now Carlton have got a complete midfield, you are going to see that return to 2021 where he's on the end of a lot of the hard work as opposed to starting the hard work.
Well, you talk about this defensive work rate, top 10 in the league per game for tackles. So often we think of Sam as work rate, getting contest to contest, using that high endurance base of his game. And then we forget that part of his game, which is not something that our top-end premium mids often give us in fantasy, but Sam gives us that. Top 10 in the league for handballs, turnovers as well, but safe to say that's actually because of how he's trying to take the game on, not because he's a butcher of the ball, so to speak. Top 15 in the league for uncontested possessions and total disposals, and top 20 for score involvement. So, Pommy, you're right. This is his player that's getting his hands on the ball, getting into space, using his skill set to try to move the Carlton game and the Carlton ball forward. And when all those variables pop, this is one of the most rounded, not just fantasy players we've got, but one of the most well-rounded midfielders in the league. Last year in AFL Fantasy, 11 tons, 6 over 120, 3 over 120, and 2 over 140. Incredible ceiling, but to go with that, the scoring floor is just as high, with just the 2 scores under 80, while in Supercoach, 11 tons, 4 over 120. And again, we talk about a scoring floor, nothing under 87. And so you think about a Lockie Neal, who we spoke about a few days ago on the 50 most relevant, got a comparable ceiling to Walsh, but he's getting tagged out of games and delivering 50s, 60s, 70s. You're not getting that with Sam Walsh. Your interesting thing you talked about to me was this 2021 version of Sam Walsh. You could probably say the final series of 2023 and that back end of Carlton's 2023 was also where we saw a different dynamic of Sam Walsh, which, as I'm hearing you say, is almost the ideal pure space that Carlton and fantasy coaches want him in, because that 2021 year is 30-plus disposals and top 10 scorer across all the formats. How does Sam Walsh get back to that spot? Have they done some things in the off-season to get there? Because if you're right that he's heading towards that 2021 era, this is a pick that's got incredible value and could be one of the best scorers in the game.
Well, I think when you look back to 2021, Carlton's injuries in the midfield was very limited as well. It was probably one of the few areas that in the last 5 years where Carlton seemed to always lead the injury list. The midfielders were quite robust, and I think you look at it with the year coming, this year for Sam that's just gone. Chera was injured, in and out of the side. There's never any real continuity for Sam, where 2021, it was quite an established midfield. It was the same guys every week. I do think the big thing people talk about, and I'm glad you touched on it, was the turnovers. Sam Walsh ranks in the top 15 for inside 50s per game, and you look at Carlton towards the middle portion of last year, it became very one-dimensional. You knew the ball was coming to Harry or Charlie. The small forwards, the medium forwards didn't really lead. Carlton become very flat-footed, and before you knew it, it was him getting the ball, bombing into the same player, 4 players on him. So I do think as you see the progression of Carlton's forward line, the evolution of that's going to help Sam out as well. The movement ahead of Sam invariably, particularly last year at the back end of the year, was woeful at times. And that's not Sam's fault. And I'm glad you said it's not because he's a butcher. I think that's the big misconception with Sam. He's getting the ball in horrible positions and trying to get Carlton's game advancing forward. And when we're flat-footed, it's a very easy intercept or it's an easy spoil. So I do think you're going to see a natural progression. Charlie's fully fit now. He's had that surgery. Harry looked like he was returning to his best, and they've put a lot of faith in Motlop, Durden, players like that. So moving forward, we should have the best forward line we've ever seen, which ultimately helps Mr. Sam Walsh, because 2021, there was 4 or 5 players spreading the load, not one superstar. Now there's 2 superstar key forwards and 4 guys hungry to prove a point.
Yeah, 100%. Like, the potential for Sam Walsh here to get to the upper echelons of not just 110 in AFL fantasy and 120 plus in Supercoach is super compelling, because you mentioned this score involvement piece. If the rising tide of the Carlton forward line becomes what they should do in 2025, well, now his score involvements are going to get up even higher. Some of those in and out balls that would have come from that lack of synergy and the lack of options inside forward 50, well, now in Supercoach, where it's the value of how you use the ball, now he's going to just see this scoring element go up and up and up. So you've talked about the forward line. Let's come then into the line that Sam sits in that midfield, because we've talked a bit on this episode about his flexibility. It's like, you need me to win the ball in the contest, I'll do that. You need me to play a little bit more of an outside running game, I'll do that, because he's so good at so many things. How do you see this Carlton midfield mix in a pure dream, everyone's fit, everyone's available sense? Because Adam Chera, we talked about him in the 50 most relevant earlier and where he might fit. Sam Doherty's back from his ACL. And then a player I know you were very much in love with during the AFL draft in Jagger Smith. These are all players that could sit in through the midfield. Do we need to talk almost individually about these guys in general, or is it a bigger conversation about the Carlton midfield mix that helps us understand Sam and his ultimate scoring potential?
I think last year it was very Band-Aid fixed Carlton's midfield. It was kind of like people were held together by sticky tape. I think this year you've really seen that evolution. We saw Elijah, he's going to have a pre-season, and I think Elijah is probably one of the most naturally talented footballers Carlton have had, probably since Judd. I know that's a bold call. I'm a huge Elijah fan. I think he is a natural football head, which helps Sam out in the way that Carlton can have rotations. And I find with Sam, because you talked about his engine, he gets pigeonholed that, okay, we can play Sam in the midfield 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. He's not going to get tired. Now we can have that more synergy that Brisbane have, that Sydney have, where they can spurt these players on the ball, then rest them at half forward, rest them on the wing. And I think Sam ultimately will look around and go, well, Jagger's got an engine and he's got pace and he's definitely going to get midfield minutes. Elijah's going to there help me pinch it. He's very direct. We know how good Cripper is. I think now you're going to see Cripps be the full-time midfielder, and Vossi's going to spurt these players in 10, 15-minute spells with Sam Doherty, who we know does that role very well. That really does help Sam out there, because then he can not just be the first receiver in clitches. He can get on the end of it. And you mentioned Chera. I find Chera the most amazing footballer. I think he's really underrated. I think his first year at Carlton, we saw how good he could be. They need to stay fit together. Him and Sam, they need that synergy, because I think when they're at their best, they really bounce off each other well. And towards last season, particularly before Chera went out full-time injured, you could see Walsh was kind of the legs of Chera, and Chera wasn't quite right. And I think you're going to start, if everyone stays fit, Sam can be Sam. And that's where you're going to get them big scores again.
Wouldn't it be an amazing place for Carlton to be able to take, only because Cripps is a generational talent, a guy that's the number 2 midfielder? You put him on almost any other AFL list, and this is the best midfielder in your team. So it's just credit to the quality of what Patrick Cripps is, to now be able to put your best midfielder behind Cripps into the best and preferred position. Like, wowee, not only for Carlton are we talking about justification for the premiership push excitement, and why 2023 we saw such a great end of and full season from that club. But now the confidence for 2025 to be there. Does a George Hewitt to you sit in this midfield mix? Because you've just listed 5 or 6 names that could roll through there and might roll through there. Does a Hewitt bring some balance and also some protection and support to Walsh, or is the club kind of gone past a George Hewitt in the midfield?
I think he's definitely there. I mean, we colloquially call him the Rodri, to use a soccer reference, of the Carlton Football Club. I think he has a thankless task. He basically does the dirty work. He's the janitor of that midfield. I do think he starts straight away. I do think long-term, though, this is where I'm looking at Cooper Lord to really say, right, okay, I can defend like George Hewitt, but I've also got that point of difference with pace, and I'm also quite aggressive with the ball in hand. And I think when you look at, people talk about Cripps' Brownlow, and I wasn't surprised he polled that well, because I think that's the issue with Carlton Football Club. Cripps is everything to that midfield. Our second highest tally was Sam Walsh. That's the problem. When you looked at Brisbane's midfield, when you looked at Sydney's midfield, even the Doggies, the spread of points for Brownlow votes is across everyone, because everyone at any given stage steps up. Where Carlton, I'd say we're the worst side in the league from the gap between our best and our worst. When our players have bad midfield games, you're punching the screen of your telly, where that's where we need to up it. We need that bottom end, the floor from them midfielders needs to be better. And I think that comes with, no disrespect to George, I'm a huge fan of him, but having a player that has a point of difference that isn't just going to tackle, he is going to help you with the ball movement as well. So I think George definitely starts 18 of the games, but I am hoping in an ideal situation, I can come on here next year and we talk about Cooper Lord, because Cooper Lord said, that's my job. That's my job. I'm the man for that defensive role.
Yeah, wouldn't that be incredible? And again, a great value pick for us in Supercoach and in fantasy too. If he can pick up that role and opportunity through preseason, through intra-clubs, let alone the evolution and growth through VFL, he becomes now another option for us from the fantasy football perspective that Carlton give us. Look, we can't talk about a Carlton podcast and a Sam Walsh podcast without unfortunately coming to the injury history that's happened for Sam. The past 2 years, barely had a preseason. The past 2 seasons hasn't played before round 5. So, which is, again, incredible when you look at some of the scoring that he's done, given the fact in the games that he's played, given he's had little to no preseason. What are you hearing out of Carlton this preseason? Is Sam fully fit and firing? Because, again, you got to go back to 21 for the last time he played a full season. And that seems to be the hallmark year we're coming back to as the ideal for Sam and for Carlton and for fantasy coaches. What are you hearing out of Carlton? I know you've got some good ears in between the walls of Icon Park. What are you hearing about Sam Walsh and how his preseason's going so far?
This episode is brought to you by Unstoppable. Discover the inspiring true story about Anthony Robles, who defied every expectation to become a national wrestling champion in Unstoppable, a new original movie from Amazon MGM Studios and director William Goldenberg, evoking the excitement and camaraderie of classic sports dramas and thrilling wrestling matches. Unstoppable features an all-star ensemble cast, including Jarrell Jerome, Jennifer Lopez, Don Cheadle, Michael Pena, and Bobby Cannavale. Watch Unstoppable now, exclusively on Amazon Prime Video.
This episode is brought to you by Allstate. Some people just know they could save hundreds on car insurance by checking Allstate first. Like you know to check the date of the big game first before you accidentally buy tickets on your 20th wedding anniversary and have to spend the next 20 years of your marriage making up for it. Yeah, checking first is smart. So check Allstate first for a quote that could save you hundreds. You're in good hands with Allstate. Savings vary. Terms apply. Allstate Fire and Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Northbrook, Illinois.
Well, I think with backs, people always panic, don't they? Like back issues, like I think in every sport, if a player has a back problem, the red flags are waving quite clearly. I do think, though, and I've always been adamant about this, I don't think it's as long-term and cataclysmic as people make out. And I look at Carlton's injury patterns over the last 3 years under Russell, and fit players suddenly became injured. From other clubs, we bring them in, they suddenly started getting knocks. I do think that's a huge area of issues at Carlton's Football Club. Whether that was as simple as it was Russell, but we've also sacked all the doctors, all the physio department. It's a whole new medical corps who have come in to assist the new fitness guy. So I think with Sam, I don't think it's a long-term problem. I think that's been mismanagement. I think Carlton have always erred on the side of, if we can play you play, and we don't look at the long game. We literally look at, if we can just get you up for this game, we'll worry about next week. I do feel like, just listening to how Innes has been talking about sending Kurnos straight away for his surgery, sending Chincotta straight away for his surgery. These are injuries that genuinely, over the last 5 years, Carlton would have been like, oh, it's all right, we'll just nurse him now till the pre-season games, and hopefully, if he doesn't kick on his right foot, round 3 he'll be fine. It's good that we're being proactive, so I would always err on the side of caution, because Sam plays a very robust style of football, and he doesn't protect himself. He goes in all guns blazing. I do get the feeling with Sam, though, he's still taking out the time trials. He looks fit and healthy. He's training full-time. The pre-season, I think, is the most important part of AFL, and you do see it with players. Them players that have pre-seasons are different. Elijah, we saw it when he came to us from Gold Coast. He still looked, without sounding horrible to him, but he didn't look like football physique. He looked like a man who had missed a lot of training. Last year, he started to have his pre-season. You saw him trim down. He looked good in navy blue. You saw the improvement in the back end from having that pre-season. So I do feel the pre-season is everything. He looks raring to go. He's a very good footballer. He's been in the system a long time. I don't think it's a problem, and I think Carlton also have the depth now. So if he needs a week off, give him the week off, as opposed to injecting him and saying, please, Sam, don't die this weekend.
Which has unfortunately happened, as you mentioned, way too often through there. All signs to me around Sam Walsh put him right in that indicator of, if you've got any level of desire to have Sam in your fantasy team or Supercoach team, starting squad feels like the perfect space for it. And there's a couple of reasons for it. Number one, you get to watch this preseason that Pommy's alluded to, that has evaded him the last 2 years. And should it continue to be interruption-free as it has been to time of recording, that's a really good positive sign. Again, that's heading back to that preeminent 2021 season, a really good indicator. The balance and the mix of that Carlton midfield, as long as that holds and the depth holds from an injury perspective, that's now really, really promising. And I've said multiple times throughout this series already, with players with the injury history that have broken down multiple times, I'm a big believer that you start them in your Supercoach and the AFL fantasy side. You bank their scoring, you bank that points, you don't cost yourself a trade to bring them into your side. The variable of injury only increases as the game's played goes on. It's only one trade to get a player of Sam's skill set out, not the trade to bring them in because they're firing, and now the one trade to get them out. So using that trade that you've got well is important to me. And Pommy, I look at the start of this Carlton season that is ahead, and not only should they fly out of the gate, but from a fantasy and a Supercoach perspective, this could be huge. There's one team that I would say, 2024's data, I'm very confident of scoring trends against, will hold in 2025. And that is Richmond, and that is who Carlton play in the first game of the round. Then they've got Hawks, Dogs, Pies. All those games are Thursday, Friday night, so it's a vice-captain move on Walsh. If he doesn't pop a big 120, 130 score, you can move on to your other guys at the end of that. And then it's Eagles and North. So from a fixture perspective for Carlton, let alone for fantasy owners and desired owners of Sam, it's all or bust on how this season starts, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I mean, Carlton have been kissed on the proverbial with their fixture list. It has to be said, like, you look long term, and I know we're in January, so like some of the teams we're penciling in as guaranteed wins, they might have a Hawthorn type year, and suddenly your boys Adelaide are one of them teams that I've got a question mark on, that they could be the new Hawthorn and burst down the block, and everyone's got a win against them, but by the by, you realise Adelaide are firing and they're kicking ass. So it's a tough one to look at fixtures, but on paper, you'd say Carlton, they've got an easy-ish start with some games that Carlton traditionally do well in. The Collingwood game, Walsh does love playing Collingwood. He gets up for them games. And I do think there's an element to talk about Collingwood that we saw last year. in all my previews, I said there's going to be a point where Pendlebury has to proverbially hand over the midfield and it become Nick Dacos' midfield. And I do feel with Carlton, you're going to start seeing that. There has to be a shift from where, okay, Cripps is the captain, but Cripps is now the accessory to someone else controlling the midfield. And I think Sam Walsh would put his hand up to say, I'm the 35-touch player again. This is my midfield, and it is going to be my midfield for a decade. So I do feel Carlton have to have that switch in where Cripps goes to more his skill set of controlling the midfield and being that body, and Sam Walsh is the guy that gets the ball when he starts dictating play. And that's my hope for next year, because I think that that's the logical shift for Carlton. We can't be so reliant on Cripps. And I think Cripps is getting older. He's still young as the grand scheme of things. He's only a 30-year-old man. But I do think that Walsh, it's going to start to become Walsh's midfield at some point in time. And I get the feeling that it is this year with the way Voss wanted to shift how Carlton play, with a little bit quicker out of the contest, a little bit more direct. So it would be logical for me. You see Sam Walsh get a lot of the ball early doors as Carlton look to spring a bit of a change and a bit of a refresh in there.
Absolutely. All signs point to, if you're happy to spend up and spend a bit of your starting salary cap on Sam Walsh, the combination of the way the team has made up now through the off-season, the health and the structure that now sits in the forward, the midfield and the defensive lines, the early season fixture, and now Sam himself having his first full preseason, one that he hasn't had in almost 3 or 4 seasons. If you've ever been bullish on Sam Walsh as a fantasy prospect before, you should be equally coming back to the table for your 2025 preseason, pre-lockout going. He has to be a factor, because you put all those together and no early season buys like many of the teams do. He's right in the mix and needs to be as one of the starting premiums you look at for your side. At the coaches panel, we choose to draft on the keeper platform. And for me, look, he's probably going to go M1 based on that seasonal average last year in AFL fantasy and keeper leagues over there, or in the keeper platform. Whereas in Supercoach, you'll probably end up going in that M3 sort of range with M2 upside. Again, the best of Sam Walsh, and we've spoken about this with Pommy on the episode now a few times, is 2021, which is top 10 finisher across the platform. So if all these variables that seem to be indicating coming back to the best of Sam, oh boy, even at a second round selection in AFL fantasy, or a third or a fourth round selection on draft day in Supercoach, you're going to get value for money. Hey, Pommy, it's been so good talking to you about not just Sam, but also Carlton. For people that are fans of you now after hearing you on this chat, or they already know you, where can we keep in touch with you across social media? And what sort of content have you got coming for us heading into round 1 of the AFL season?
Yes, Pommyinoz on all platforms. We've just got a new logo, and it helps you out because the name is in the logo, so should be able to find it. If you are in doubt, click it, and if you hear a funny accent, it's probably me. I am the only one. So, yeah, over there, we've got loads of new stuff coming as well. Team Pommyinoz has grown in the off-season. We've got graphic designers. We've got all sorts. So the content now looks aesthetically pleasing as well. We have a new AFL show starting as well. We're really covering the whole of the AFL. And as the season goes on, there'll be lots of draft content. There'll be lots of generic AFL content, all with a Carlton flair as well. But we do cover everyone as well. So if you want to come and just mock Carlton have lost by 20 points against West Coast Eagles, it's always a good value. Come over there. But we are a good bunch down there, and we have a bit of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Honestly, I've been loving over the last couple of months watching what Pommy's been doing, not just in and around the AFL draft space. Had some brilliant understanding of the draft crop and how they would fit into the AFL landscape, but also just a greater understanding of Carlton. And I think that's important for us in the fantasy footy perspective, is to not just know the numbers, the data points and the potential, but get into other people that understand the club you don't support. Because we've all got that bias of my club's this, and we know it back to front, but we're trusting other levers. And so if you do want to understand the Carlton side and the Carlton perspective a little bit more, this is one of, if not the best place to go. We've put all the links of those places, social media, the YouTube channel, in the description of this episode. So if you're like, where was it? What was it? It's Pommyinoz. It's not that hard to find, but I've made it easy for you anyway. I've dropped it in the description of this episode. Also in there, all the links to get in touch with us across social media, get your hands on some Coaches Panel merch, and also gain access to our Patreon. They get a bunch of additional rewards just for doing so. In 20 seconds, I'm going to give you a little clue about who's next in the 50 most relevant. But if you're loving the series so far and you're watching this on YouTube, comment below. Let me know. What do you think Sam Walsh is going to do in 2025? What's he going to average? I think it could be high. So too, across the audio podcast platforms, if you haven't given us a 5-star rating, it takes you 2 seconds, but it does make a huge difference and impact for us here on the channel. All right, you ready for a clue on who's next? Let's see if you can guess it. When this player made his way into the team in 2024 for the club that he plays for, it totally changed the fortunes of this club. Structurally, he may just be the most important piece. He's unheralded in many different ways, and he's shown over the past 2 years that his scoring pedigree can be right up with the top of his line. But what he brings for us in 2025 is something that we didn't think he would bring us in 2025. He presents supreme value based on his proven performance over the last 2 years. Who's this wizard structural piece for the club? And how important could he be to your AFL fantasy and Supercoach sides? You'll find out tomorrow in the 50 most relevant.